It's pretty easy to argue that FDR and the New Deal were kind of a big deal. They did a lot to help America during the Great Depression, and they even had some pretty lasting effects on us. What were those lasting effects? Well, stick around because that's what we're going to talk about today in Mr. E's classroom. Hey ladies and gentlemen, Mr. E here. Today we're going to talk about the effects of the New Deal. Specifically, we're going to answer the question, how did FDR and the New Deal change American politics? So grab your pencil and paper, get ready to take some notes. Hopefully by the end of this video you'll have a good answer for that question. One of the first really big changes the New Deal and FDR had on American politics was the role of women. One of the best examples of this is FDR's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. Remember that she was kind of his eyes and ears. She was out there trying to figure out exactly what the mood of the country was, and she'd report back to him and he would actually listen. Before Eleanor Roosevelt showed up, the First Lady was more of a social figure. Not to kind of make light of the First Ladyship, but most First Ladies before Eleanor were kind of party planners. But it goes way beyond just Eleanor Roosevelt and the changing role of the First Lady. Frances Perkins was the first female cabinet member. FDR appointed her to be the Secretary of Labor in his presidential cabinet. She was pretty much in charge of making sure everything was going good with the labor force here in the United States. And think about just how important the labor force was for America's economy. Even beyond Frances Perkins, FDR was really expanding the woman's role in politics. A prime example is a lady named Mary McLeod Bethune. She was the first black woman to head up a federal agency. She was the director of Negro Affairs to the National Youth Administration. This was basically an organization in the government that was trying to help young African Americans. And speaking of African Americans, FDR really pushed to change their role in the government. We've already talked about FDR's brain trust, but FDR also had what he called his black cabinet. Their official name was the Federal Council of Negro Affairs. Sometimes they were referred to as the Black Brain Trust. This group of African Americans really advised the president on specifically African American issues. And it turns out, for the most part, FDR really listened to what they had to say and took most of that with him when he was planning out the New Deal. FDR and the New Deal also really kind of changed how the government interacted with the Native American population. The Indian Reorganization Act did a lot to try to help Native Americans. It provided a lot of economic assistance for them. It also gave them a lot of control back that they had kind of lost. It also gave them a kind of autonomy. They were more or less allowed to do kind of whatever they wanted to on the reservations. FDR also really encouraged with his New Deal Native Americans to go back to practicing their original customs and speaking their own language. All that stuff that had before kind of been beat out of them. FDR had a very diverse following. The New Deal coalition, as they kind of became known, was FDR's backers, the people that really were supporting what he was doing. And they were made up of all sorts of people, not just your stereotypical Democrats. You had Southern whites, a lot of Northern blue-collar workers, and all sorts of African Americans really wanted to see FDR and his New Deal succeed. This gave a whole lot of strength to the Democratic Party in general, and allowed them to kind of be a dominating force for a pretty long while. Under the New Deal and FDR, you also saw a huge expansion of the role of the government. The government took a much larger role in the economy. Pretty much they totally abandoned that laissez-faire attitude that we had taken before this. The United States became what was known as a welfare state. The government actually took responsibility for its citizens. It helped those citizens that weren't able to help themselves. And we also really saw a change in the nature of the presidency itself. Before FDR, for the most part, the president was kind of separated from the American people. There wasn't a whole lot of interaction. FDR comes around and he communicates directly with the American people. You remember those fireside chats that we talked about? FDR took an active role to make sure that every American knew exactly what was going on, and he also wanted to, for the most part, hear exactly what all the American people wanted from him as a president. So I know exactly what you're thinking by this point. Mr. E, did the New Deal actually end the Depression for America? Well, the answer to that question is no. But that no is followed by a but. The New Deal really didn't end the Depression per se. It did, however, provide all sorts of relief and jobs for American people. The New Deal definitely got the economy rolling again. It was only a matter of time. Eventually, the New Deal probably would have put an end to the Depression. Unfortunately, a tiny little thing called World War II sort of got in the way of that. And when the war happened, the Depression ended really quickly. We'll talk more about that when we talk about World War II. The New Deal also established lasting legislation. One of the big things the New Deal accomplished was that it kept another depression from happening again. Now, there have been a lot of close calls since the 1930s, but we've never slumped into that bad an economic situation. Alright, so what's important to take away from this video? Well, number one, remember that the role of women in politics really changed because of FDR and the New Deal. Number two, remember that minorities, to some degree, really had a lot to say under the New Deal. And lastly, number three, remember that under the New Deal, the role of the government was greatly expanded. There you go, guys, the effects of the New Deal. Hopefully you got some great notes. Be ready for that quiz when it happens in class. And as always, remember, don't stop learning.